You should stop reading your notes, like right now. This is what I did instead of reading my notes, and it got me a perfect 45 in the IB Diploma. All right, number 1 is to execute active recall. So the other day when you got back from school, Jerry decided to study. But instead of doing past paper questions or any alternative form of active recall, he decides to sit back and take a more passive approach to studying. He spends all of his time reading his notes. I mean, you probably know when you want to do some past paper questions or maybe solve some type of case that your teacher has given you in preparation for the exam, but they can seem too annoying or just too difficult, and you just kind of look at them and you're like, nah, I'd rather not do this right now. Well, guess what? This is exactly what everybody else feels. This is exactly what your competition feels. However, the people who win are those who take advantage of this opportunity, right? Look at what Bjorn did. Bjorn instead gets right to the most valuable study strategies, active recall. He understands that he must understand the content enough to answer his first IB questions, and then he understands that the studying doesn't actually begin until he does that first study question. He practices active recall by doing as many past paper questions as humanly possible, and at the end he gets a perfect 45 in the IB Diploma. Now look, I used to read my notes all the time. In fact, when I first started the IB Diploma year number 1, my second math test, I got a level 4 in that math test. And that was simply because I spent all of my time trying to read my notes and trying to somehow understand the concepts without doing any practice questions at all. And it's actually very funny if you look back to my progression as a student in the IB Diploma, where at the beginning I was spending all my time either doing some form of Quizlet, which again is a form of active recall but isn't that strong, mixed in with a bunch of reading your notes, mixed in with trying to do some readings, looking at the textbook, all these types of study strategies that aren't that strong. And then as soon as I got that 4 in mathematics, I realized that I had to take a more active approach. I had to take a more proactive, go out of my way, do more difficult things, do more difficult past paper questions. And because of that, literally one test to the other, from a 4, I went up to a 7 in my next exam. Before I tell you exactly how I did this, let me preface that I take notes during class. In fact, it's great to take notes during class. I'm not saying at all don't take notes. I take notes all the time. However, I take those notes not with the intention of wanting to read them later, but instead with the intention of trying to summarize and articulate in my own language the content that is being taught on the board. And most students actually in lecture itself, they just passively copy the content that is being taught. That is actually not the most effective strategy. And I can give you a good example of this, right? If you look at economics, where you need to, especially in paper number 1, where you need to write your own response, like the 10-point and the 15-point answer, you need to write your own response. Essentially what you're doing is you're re-articulating the concepts and applying it into the specific framework that the IB gives you, right? In this case, it would be the 10-point question or the 15-point question. Do you realize that you can essentially kill 2 birds with 1 stone by trying to do that entire process during class, right? You notice that when the teacher presents some concept, let's say in economics, it's all about the impact of tax on the supply and demand curve. Instead of simply just writing down and just copying it word for word and then trying to copy the graphs, why don't you just sit back and ask yourself, how can I summarize this as if it was a past paper question? How can I summarize this in a way that's easy to understand? And when I approach my note taking from that angle of trying to reorient the notes, less from a, I want to copy this down, and more from a, I need to understand this so I can then explain it to somebody else, it completely changed the way I take notes. I'm not saying don't go back and review your notes. What I am saying though is you don't want to spend all of your time studying those notes. So what I suggest instead is to transition to active recall as fast as possible. The phrase I like to have is that studying doesn't begin until you do your first past paper question. If you haven't gone into that first past paper question, do not consider yourself as having started the studying process. Like, do not consider it. It hasn't started yet. And all my friends who got above 42, they always look at the questions themselves as the quote unquote notes from which to study from. In fact, when I was doing the 10-mark past paper question for economics, I realized that I could actually look at the solutions of the past paper question itself, and I could utilize that as bullet points for which I need to study. Right? Those are things I need to know. Those are different strategies, different tactics, different perspectives by which I can approach solving this past paper question. So in essence, the mark scheme itself actually became the quote unquote notes that I utilized as fuel for my future responses, right? And then I got those, basically what I did is I looked at the mark scheme, I simply wrote it again with those new ideas, with those new perspectives, paragraphs, whatever, frameworks. I wrote it again, meaning that I got the additional practice and I got the application of being able to apply strategies that I did not otherwise apply, right? Content that I was not originally thinking when I first saw the answer. And then when you do that consistently, that's where you build your intuition, meaning that when you see a question like this in the future, you're like, damn, I've seen this before. I know how to solve it. I know what to do. I know all the different responses because I spent all my time studying all of those different responses. I like to ask myself this question all the time: what problem are we solving? All right, so if we look at reading our notes, what problem are we solving when we read our notes? Why are we reading our notes? What problem is reading the notes solving? Is it trying to build our intuition? Is it trying to get us a higher score? Is it trying to develop an understanding? Well, it turns out that before I was getting perfect 7s, it almost always happened that I was reading my notes simply to understand the concepts. And it turns out that that actually is not the best way to do that. I found that in my own life, at least, reading my notes was not the most effective. Instead, I just went on some YouTube videos, quickly watched the content as fast as possible to get a general understanding as to how to solve the problem. And the big trick here is that you got to start by looking at the problem itself. Right? They did this very interesting study where they showed people the problems that they were going to solve in mathematics, and they had no idea what the concepts were about. They had no prior knowledge in that area, but they saw the problems first. And then by seeing the problems first, when they sat down to study and review the content and learn the new curriculum, they were able to better orient their perception towards learning stuff that was in direct relationship to what they saw in those questions. So oftentimes when we read our notes, it's basically an ineffective way to solve a problem that can be solved more effectively. That's number one. The other reason that I read my notes, at least, was to solve the problem of trying to find all the potential solutions to a problem, okay? And this is actually a more valid reason why you should read your notes. But this is not necessarily saying that I studied them, okay? I studied my responses, meaning I got those solutions that I wrote down. The best example, again, is just economics. I got those solutions that I wrote down from doing the past paper questions, and then I looked at my notes to see how I can improve those solutions, and then what concepts were taught in class or in the curriculum that I can integrate into the economics solutions themselves, which again get reinforced by the mark scheme. Now, if you fall into the former category where you're reading your notes simply because it's the easiest thing to do, or you just kind of don't want to do anything else. All right, I get you. I was in that part as well. That's why I was not doing very well at the beginning of the IB. And you need to realize that we humans, we apes, right? We're fundamentally designed to do what's easy. We want to do what's easy and fun instead of what's hard and difficult, right? Because from an evolutionary perspective, if we do what's easy, we're more likely to survive, right? We're more likely to survive if we take the easier route than the harder route if the outcome is the exact same. Just as a side note, this is also why understanding our evolution is such a critical point in developing not only good study habits, but also in just developing goal achievement skills in basically every aspect of your life, right? It's a meta skill that you can apply to all of these different disciplines. And I love the quote from Jim Rohn so much about this, that if you do what's easy, your life will be hard. If you do what's hard, your life will be easy. The hard thing to do in the IB and in studying and in university applications is almost always the thing that gives you those results. Why? Because most students are not willing to do it. Most students are not willing and capable to do the most difficult thing. And that's exactly how you're gonna win, right? Because high school is a competition, getting to top university is a competition. The only way you're gonna beat the other students who wanna get into that top university, get that perfect 45 in the IB diploma, is by doing the stuff that they will not do. And by also not doing the stuff that they will do. Right? So an example of not doing the stuff that they will do is not spending all your time studying the notes. Doing the stuff that they won't do includes spending all of your time on difficult active recall. All right. And it's more difficult to sit down and tell yourself, hey, I'm going to sit down for an hour and a half, do focused work, solving the most difficult questions, right? The questions that are that I don't understand, that offer the most roadblocks. And then every single time I do that, I ask myself, what is the most difficult thing? It's difficult to do that. It is challenging to force yourself, channel all your energy towards doing the most difficult questions, especially in the question bank. However, that is why you're going to get the 45. That is why you're going to get the top score. That's why you're going to get into the top university, right? The top university, the top score, the top 45, those scores don't reward the people who don't want to do the difficult work. All right, just ask yourself, why do you deserve to get the 45? Which, by the way, you don't deserve anything, but why do you deserve to get the 45? Is it because you wanted to read your notes and you did what's easy? Like, do you really think somebody who does that deserves to get the 45? Absolutely not. That's why these programs are so difficult to get into, because only a small amount of people are willing to do the challenging work. So do what's necessary. That also builds character, as I talked about in one of my other videos. And if I was to spend time doing something fun, I would rather spend my time doing something fun with my friends or my family or one of my hobbies, rather than trying to make my studying just marginally more fun, but more annoying, and actually I end up spending more time and I get a worse score. So don't do that. Instead, focus in on active recall. And then number 2 reason why you should not read your notes to study is that you're simply just recycling information. You realize that when you read the same thing more than once, like 2-3 times, it is very easy for your brain to gloss over the content. Why? Because you've already seen it before. And your brain goes, yeah, I know this. Yeah, I've seen this before. And because of that, it tricks your brain into thinking that it's actually studying, when in reality, it's simply dismissing the content that it believes it already understands. And then I see this all the time with students where they reread the content and then it gives them the impression that they understand the material when in reality they don't. And point number 3 is that studying and relearning and just rereading your notes is actually bad for your memory. The reason why is because when you're reading notes, it trains your brain to realize that the information that you want in your brain, right? The notes on the paper, you want that to actually be remembered. It trains your brain that that information that is now on the paper is documentized, meaning that there's a certain place in the physical world where you can find the information that is not in your brain. Hence, it tricks your brain into thinking that you don't need to learn it, that you don't need to memorize it simply because it's already in some third-party source. In other words, the brain assumes that simply because the information has already been written and stored elsewhere, there is no need to remember it. And you got to remember that your brain is not designed to remember content, right? I like to look at the brain, and again, this is very oversimplified, so I apologize for the biology majors and anyone of that type. But essentially, your brain you can think of as a idea generating machine, right? It loves coming up with new ideas. It loves coming up with new different combinations of the input it just took. But your brain is not the best at storing information. And reason number 4 as to why you should stop studying your notes is because you're familiarizing yourself with the content rather than the concepts. You need to understand that the goal before you start doing any past paper questions, like the brief period of time, which should be somewhere between like 1 to 9, I would argue. So 10% of your time studying should be spent on just trying to understand the concepts before you actually get to doing the past paper questions, right? So in that 10% of time, your only goal to that is to develop a thorough and deep understanding of the concepts themselves and then how they can be tested. Your goal is not to learn all the content, because I found at least that when you start doing as many past paper questions as possible, the content just comes up over and over and over again, and you start to see the patterns and you start to really internalize the content as it's being applied to the concepts and to the questions. The best example I give you is in organic chemistry, where the answer choices to the questions were just basically all the same. And then once you started doing enough organic chemistry questions over and over and over again, you started going through and started seeing the exact same answer choices, right? The exact same solutions to the questions. And then when you do that, you start to internalize the content of the solution, and then that informs your content. But that was only done by having done as many past paper questions as humanly possible. In other words, I understood the concepts, meaning I understood exactly how organic chemistry functioned to a minimal degree that I was able to then do the questions. And then by doing as many questions as possible, all the content holes that I had were filled in. All right, so those are the biggest 4 reasons why you should not study and read your notes. Instead, what you should do is simply active recall. And this is basically the format that I follow. You want to study with the intention of trying to identify what is the constraint, right? What is stopping you from achieving a perfect score in the IB? Why are you not getting 7s on all of your tests? Ask yourself why you're not able to do it. Next time you sit down to do a question, okay, look at the question. And then if you don't see a solution, ask yourself why. What am I missing? Just try to be curious. Try to get to the bottom of that mystery. What is stopping you? What is the roadblock, right? The block that is stopping the water from flowing down the dam. What is that one thing for you? For most high achieving students, it's typically the aha moment, meaning it's a piece of intuition that, especially in math, just kind of clicks once you've done enough questions and you sort of see something similar in a previous question. And then you're like, damn, I finally understand because I get this previous concept that I learned elsewhere, and now I can apply it to solving this question. And then once you identify that aha, you just keep asking yourself over and over and over again, why can I not do this question? What is stopping me? What is the block? Why can I not find the solutions? You get out your stopwatch. We talk about using a stopwatch to track that. And then you just gamify the entire process, put on some fun music, do as many past paper questions as possible. And then that's what's going to separate you and get you that perfect score. And then it's that right there that's going to separate you from the rest of the crowd and help you get that perfect score. All right, so that's all I got for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Again, if you have any questions at all, please leave them into the comment sections down below or shoot me an email at JqR@wharton.upenn.edu. Thanks so much for watching again. And until next time, stay grizzly, everybody. I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.